Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm trusting that Asa will be joining us soon. We've got a great turnout. So happy to see so many of you. Welcome to the first in our speakers series for the spring. My name is Melinda Morgan, and I am the lead project investigator for the Transformation Network. I'm going to go ahead and start my PowerPoint for today. So can everyone see this at this point? Give me a thumbs up. You can see
Looks
it.
good, but it is in presenter view.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay, here we go. How about now?
Still in presenter view.
All right, there we go. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone. As I said, I'm Melinda Morgan. I'm the team lead for the Transformation Network. This is the first in our speaker series, which is going to be focusing on convergent research, which is sort of our research design in the TN. So today we're going to be getting into how we approach convergent research. And I'm so pleased to see so many of you as we sort of kind of get into this idea of what it means to be doing what we call convergent research as we engage in it with transdisciplinarity and team science, what we call our interepistemic approach to team research. And so with me in this is going to be some of the co-authors for a paper that we have been working on related to this idea, including Alex Webster, Asa Stone, Kinsley Freeman, and Hannah Love. So
hey, Mindy, real quick, it looks like your mail has got moved up, so you want to minimize that.
Thank you so much. I mean, let me just kind of close this actually off so you guys can't see this. Good. Thank you so much. So we're gonna get into it. And as I said, it's the first in the speaker series. I'm gonna ask Rachel to go ahead and put into the chat the flyer for our whole speaker series this spring, so that you guys can see what else is going to be happening in the TN related to these talks. And also want to thank Rachel. They are our new program coordinator and responsible for the new TN template PowerPoint that I'm going to be using and our new brand standards that are reflected in this. So please help me and join me in welcoming them. They're a great addition to our team. And they're also going to be adding a few more things into the chat during this talk. So thank you so much, Rachel. Want to spend a little more time getting to know who's on the Zoom today and talk a little bit about the TN. Then we're going to get into this idea of what is convergence and what is that relationship to transdisciplinarity, which is a big question many of us have. And then we're going to get into what is the TN's approach to this idea of convergence. And to do that, I'm going to be asking other members of the team to add to that discussion, with Asa taking on diversity, equity, and inclusion, Alex talking about systems thinking, Kinsey talking about community engagement, and Hannah talking about continued learning. Those are all represented in this figure that we're going to be unpacking during our discussion. And I like to call this the Transformation Network's octopus. So we're going to be unpacking the octopus, and then we're going to be having a shared discussion with remaining time about how this approach goes into action with your ideas and your input about what this looks like with your own research. So please be sort of making maybe your own sort of figure about how this sort of relates to how it fits for you as we kind of go throughout this talk. So let's talk a little bit about what the Transformation Network is, because I see many of you are maybe from outside the TN a little bit, and I'm gonna just kind of briefly kind of unshare my screen for just a minute. I'm just risking that for a second here. It's dangerous, but go ahead and give me we're going to use the reactions here for a second, and go ahead and give me a heart reaction if you are a member of the TN faculty, students, or staff. So go ahead and give me a heart emoji if you are one of those. Thank you so much. And give me a thumbs up if you are a TN community partner or if you are on the advisory board for the TN. So we can see who you are. Great. Oh, wonderful. Good to see some of you. Thank you so much for coming. And then give us the bugle celebration if you're a member of one of our sister research groups, or you're just a friend, or you're interested in learning just more about the TN in general, or convergent research of some kind, in that way, that respect. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so good to see so many of you in that. So we have got kind of a nice mix of different sort of participants kind of on the call today in that way. Really helpful. All right. See if I can kind of get back into the system here. So that tells me I do need to tell you a little bit about the Transformation Network and sort of who we have and who we're about. So we are a National Science Foundation Sustainable Regional Systems Network. And we are across 8 different research universities in the Intermountain West. The University of New Mexico is the lead institution. And our aim is to build resilient communities and ecosystems throughout the Intermountain Western United States, which of course faces many challenges, from climate change and wildlife to food deserts and injustice. And we do this work, as we'll be talking about, with a number of other folks, including community partners and place-based communities. So this work really started off and in taking on these challenges as a result of an NSF workshop in 2019. And Bruce Hamilton, who's on the call who's on the Zoom today, supported that workshop and was actually at that workshop, as was Deb Haaland, who at the time was a member of our congressional delegation and is now Secretary of Interior. She gave a keynote address. And this is what she said at this workshop, which has really become a charge for the TN. She said that overcoming the existential crises of climate change, a growing rural-urban divide, and growing economic inequalities demands action from all of us, that we need new partnerships, inclusive approaches, and agents of change who will fight together for a sustainable future for our urban and rural communities and landscapes. And so we've really taken that to heart and took that workshop to develop an integrated group of folks to take on the challenges of sustainable futures across the Intermountain West. And so we currently have a research design that includes 4 place-based collaboratives, dozens of project charters, and a number of cross-cutting synthesis groups on things like wildlife and wildfire, regenerative agriculture, indigenous sovereignty, and other things across the Intermountain West. And we do this work at these 8 universities and also with 3 interconnected core themes. And these core themes include participatory governance approaches, food, energy, water systems, including regenerative agriculture and indigenous food sovereignty, and also working with headwater-dependent communities to think about shared stewardship and the need for sustainable ecosystem services. And of course, these are all overlapping and interconnected issues. And we do this work with our community partners. And this is just sort of a snapshot of the types of community partners that we work with across these different types of research projects that we have. And I'm going to ask Rachel to put a link in the chat to our website that can give you, if you click in the research section, that will give you sort of a better sense of the sort of types of more specific research projects that we have going on. And we're in the process right now of doing a better job of representing where the community partnerships sort of roll out sort of in that project, in the various projects. We do this work using a research design of convergence. And so this talk is really about what does it mean to do convergent research? And we start with how the National Science Foundation defines convergence. And the NSF has really two elements they emphasize, and I'm going to add a third element that I think is really also very much reflected in the actual elements of the discussions that are really seen when you get into the actual work that's being done. But the first two elements are that there's a compelling societal problem that's being taken on, and that there's deep integration across the disciplines. And this is an idea that came across with NSF's 10 Big Ideas for Future Investment that actually came across in 2016. But when you look at how NSF is actually approaching it, there's a third element that's also very much coming across, which is that there's a push for novelty and innovation. And in a way, this really comes as no surprise, because this idea of novelty and innovation is really, part of NSF's DNA. The National Science Foundation is always pushing us for new knowledge and paradigms to be sort of at the cutting edge, and investing in, even when doing something and investing in things that are use inspired, to be the driver of sort of what's next. That is very much in line with where we're at in the transformation network, because our belief is that existing paradigms are sort of inefficient to take on the challenges facing our communities, and that we do need new tools and approaches that embrace the complexity that communities face, and also embrace multiple ways of knowing. And so when you look at especially what NSF has funded to date and the history, you will see that to date, much of what has been taken on by NSF has been fairly STEM heavy and operationalized fairly STEM heavy efforts. And the convergence efforts to date are in the fields of biotech, nanotech, engineering, other fields, and that there still is a relatively few challenges that are highly interdisciplinary that incorporate the social sciences, the humanities, and other disciplines. That's been sort of acknowledged, and something that very much is something that our team is stretching ourselves to sort of take on. You'll also see that NSF recognizes that it differentiates itself from transdisciplinarity, and it says that to the extent to which it is similar to other approaches, it's most similar to transdisciplinarity, but there's really not an articulation of how it's different from transdisciplinarity. So let's see if we can take that on right now and talk a little bit about that. And what is transdisciplinarity? So this is a recent paper that shares that there really is no universal definition of transdisciplinarity, but in general, there's kind of a recognition that there's integration of knowledge and expertise across disciplines, the engagement of societal actors with an end goal of reaching societally desirable outcomes. And I would say that this definition does look a lot like convergence in many respects, but I would also say that this definition actually reflects one school of transdisciplinarity, and that in reality, there are actually two schools of transdisciplinarity that exist in the literature when you look more closely. There's the Zurich school, or what's sometimes called the Motu school, and also the Nicholsonian school. Excuse me for the cat bombing. This definition actually more closely fits, and what people almost always are talking about when they talk about transdisciplinarity is this first one, the Zurich school, which is more focused on societally responsive and solution-focused efforts. And there is this emphasis on non-academic partners in this school. And it does closely resemble convergent research in many respects, with its emphasis on societal responses and integration of disciplines. But it is different in the sense that it's less concerned with novelty and creating new paradigms and conceptual models. So the Zurich School is really driven by practical concerns associated with creating a new contract between science and society. And much of sustainability science is really embracing this Mode 2 school and this approach to transdisciplinarity. But there is this other school, the Nicholsonian school, which was created by Botzarob Niclousseau, who's actually a French physicist. And this school is one in which researchers acknowledge their own subjectivity and make efforts to sort of engage reality differently by thinking about, by rethinking the traditional absolute separation between the subject and the object. And so there's an emphasis on the creation of new knowledge that is sort of emergent from the cross-fertilization of different epistemologies, different perspectives. And Toddy Steelman and her colleagues actually successfully engaged in this approach and this design in the engagement of with Indigenous peoples in the three inland delta regions of Canada, with scholars and students working on social ecological change. And this is actually a figure from their paper in which they work to identify problems and work on solutions that theoretically bridged the duality of scientifically objective worldviews and subjectively experienced worldviews and Indigenous ontologies. And so for us, we find that the Nicholsonian School provides a very productive way of thinking about working with place-based communities, Indigenous communities, Hispano land-grant communities, others, and also a productive way of thinking about working within academia in the fact that there are often very different epistemic frameworks that are at play and different ways of thinking about both knowledge and knowledge production. So I recognize here that there's absolutely no way that you can actually read this table. But this is maybe my pitch for you actually reading the papers. I'm going to ask Rachel now to put a link for the manuscript that we have in review right now in the chat. So for those of you who are interested in diving a little bit deeper into this, this is sort of our comparison of the Convergence, the Nicholsonian School, and the Zurich School with some of the key characteristics that we've just been talking about. Collaboration with academic partners, non-academic partners, responses to societal problems, and some other characteristics, to sort of see how they sort of compare and contrast to one another. And see how you can kind of see the ways in which they both overlap and they differentiate from one another. But for us in the Transformation Network, we're sort of thinking of it this way. We're drawing from all three of these. And for us, we're pulling from what we think are the real strengths and overlapping elements that we find are the most important. So for us, from the National Science Foundation elements, we're definitely pulling from the novelty and innovation push that is coming from that tradition. And from the Zurich School, the solution-focused and societally responsive elements that overlap with NSF are very important. And of course, with the Nicholsonian School, the ways in which we're reaching across ontologies and epistemologies is something we're really emphasizing. And then to operationalize all of that, we have many different elements that we are working within that are represented in this figure. And we're now going to be turning to other members of the authorship team to talk about each of these elements and how we pull from these different elements to operationalize actually producing convergent research. So we're going to be talking about systems thinking, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, community engagement, and continued learning. And in this figure, these little white dots are supposed to represent different projects, and then the little sort of that are kind of interacting with these different sort of systems over time. And then the convergent research is produced as an outcome of the interactions with the different sort of recipe, I guess, of these different elements that are being engaged, I guess, is the unpacking of the octopus so far. So I guess with that, I'm going to be turning this over, I think, to Asa to take us through to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So Asa, are you ready to take it to the next slide?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Greetings, everyone. I'm Asa, and I was the founding co-director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Justice, and Education through 2023. And Convergence research thrives on diverse perspectives, so it is essential that we create a space that marginalized voices are not only heard and valued, but amplified. And this is why striving for diversity, ensuring equity, promoting inclusion, as well as pursuing justice becomes critical for ethical convergence research. And with embracing multiple ways of knowing as desired outcomes, approach was to ground ourselves in 3 principles of cultural humility. So one of our key initiatives was the Cultural Humility Workshop series, and it addressed implicit biases in convergence research and education, which aimed to foster inclusive practices and how to engaging in continuing learning that was based on cultural humility principle of lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. The second initiative was the Facilitator Apprenticeship Program, which focused on empowering Indigenous graduate students. We aim to balance the power dynamics by explicitly embedding diverse voices into knowledge co-generation. The third initiative was Innovators and Landscape and Native Voices in STEM series, which we collaborated with Indigenous and place-based practitioners. This aligned with a commitment to model institutional accountability as TN and honored multiple ways of knowing. So by practicing cultural humility and embracing multiple ways of knowing through these 3 initiatives, we attempted not only to advance convergence research, but also inspiring more holistic and more inclusive strategies for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Asa. Alex.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Webster, and I have been senior personnel on the TN since the beginning, largely in the role of coordinating research in the Rio Grande Fireshed exemplar. And as part of that, I've been helping with some of this work on the systems thinking element and frameworks that we are exploring as tools for convergence research in the TN, along with the other big people who have been working on this a lot are Yolanda Lin and Jan Bull. So systems thinking is a body of theory and a set of practical applications that aims to infer how systems behave by gaining a deeper understanding of their underlying structure. And in that definition, a system, which I'm showing here, is defined as a collection of interconnected elements that generate behavioral patterns over time. You can go to the next slide. So systems thinker have developed a constellation really of modeling approaches in order to explore those systems' underlying structures. And these really span from conceptual and qualitative to computational and highly quantitative. And in that definition, a model is any stylized representation of a system. So here I'm showing some examples The causal loop models and the stock and flow models are two very classic ones in system dynamics thinking. I'm also showing you here a process inquiry model that comes out of emerging methods in system modeling, and relational models, which is what I'm calling all the other ones that in some way have elements that are related to each other that could therefore be considered a systems thinking approach. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So as a field, systems thinking has undergone several paradigmatic changes or waves, and we have found it useful to consider and understand this history to understand the current state of the field and its usefulness and limitations for convergence research in the TN. So I summarize them here from this great review that I'm citing here, and I'll go through this briefly. So if we go to the next one, the first wave, starting in the 1940s to 60s, early users of systems ideas kind of tried to break down barriers between different more conventional disciplines by generating by generalizing a set of unique modeling traditions from all those different disciplines into a common set of practices that they called systems thinking. And these practitioners emphasized producing more quantitative models designed to represent reality, and they made judgments about how to define the boundaries and scales of those systems and the scope of the modeling project as loosely defined experts on whatever the topic was. So we go to the next one. Critiques in the 60s and through the 80s really pushed the field to consider models more as aids for the development of understanding between people with different perspectives, rather than strict representations of reality. And this really led to the development of more qualitative and conceptual approaches and an emphasis on developing more of a shared understanding of the meaning of the model and its elements and its behaviors, rather than trying to strictly represent reality. They still, though, had this sort of pragmatic approach by deciding who did set the boundaries and the scope of the system. And then the next one, the scale and scopes, like I said, were still set in a pretty top-down manner. And so there was a third wave that really emphasized acknowledging and critiquing how those kinds of judgments are made, particularly from the perspectives of more marginalized members of the system or the modeling team or both. And that third wave really embraced the idea of what they called methodological pluralism, which really seek to mix both the quantitative and qualitative approaches of those first two waves into a more flexible and responsive systems thinking practice that uses a lot of models. And that's something that the TN convergent approach is really trying to emphasize as well. And then finally, the fourth wave, or emerging directions, they have two categories. One is this emerging idea that we really need to move beyond rational analysis. I'm saying this, it's emerging in systems thinking literature. Obviously, this is an idea that has been happening in other fields for a long time, but we're figuring out ways to do this in a systems thinking framework and to embrace more experiential, presentational, and practical ways of knowing and how to incorporate that kind of information. And then the second one is, now that there's all this methodological pluralism, how do we have some uniting frameworks that are able to help people that are coming into the systems thinking world or who want to use these tools approach this field and decide which tools, what modeling approaches and whatnot are most useful. So that is the systems thinking history rundown, and I think it gives a little bit of a window into all the different ways that this field can be used in this approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kinsey Freeman and I'm a PhD student from WSU. And Sonia Hall and I created this framework here focusing on community engagement, which really goes in line with the NSF convergent research and how that's done. So the core of this was to create a framework based on the other relevant literature that would help researchers, mainly within academia and even within the TN, better conduct research with communities that answer societal questions and addresses problems. So that's where these different components come here. So first we have the what, So what activities are the partners engaging in? So what is the need? How can that be addressed as well? So then that moves down here to the how. What approach fosters the appropriate level of participation? And then we can also think about the continuum of community engagement. So we start over on the left with outreach, which is just reaching out to community partners, and we can move all the way to the right to engagement, which is really co-developing research that addresses problems that the community needs and doing that in a reciprocal way that isn't, one directional, taking resources from the community or just trying to answer research questions within the academy. Other things to think about within this framework is the why. So what is the purpose of the research? How does the community want to engage? What resources do they have to engage? And how can you work within that? And do your goals align as well? And then also we can see on the left, we have who. So who are the partners? So identifying who are the partners within the community. And like I said, what are the expectations for participation? So yeah, this is the framework that we created. We were hoping that this would help researchers better understand and better address community engagement from the very beginning. So create a good foundation, and maybe that would even be before applying for the grant or creating the research design, and doing that instead with a community to make sure that it can be, like I said, reciprocal. There can be money maybe to pay community members and help make sure that everyone's involved in the research process. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Hannah.
All right. I'm Hannah Love. I work at UNM as a senior researcher doing social network analysis and working on their science to team science initiatives. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about continued learning and social network analysis. So when we talk about the convergence approach, it's not a one and done. It's a process, or as sociologists like to call it, it's a constructivist process where we're learning, adjusting, and continuing to learn. So the slide on your screen is an example of just one of the social network diagrams that have been created about the TN. A social network evaluation presents an opportunity for continued learning because it allows us to understand how the actions of the TN are creating and building their team. More specifically, social network analysis answers questions like, is the TN growing a network? Are diverse members of the network included? Are students integrated to the network? And so much more. So on the topic of continued learning in students, let's talk about them just a little bit more. It's really hard to see, but there is a bright orange node kind of in the center of this diagram. And I do want to highlight it for just a moment because what it says is it highlights the convergent workshops for graduate students. And where this node is located in the diagram, being quite central, really illustrates the fact that this convergent science curricula is important in building the network and the important role it plays in bringing everyone together. And so there are questions like this and a lot of others that can be answered and from social network analysis. So in conclusion, this goes hand in hand with continued learning, because from the diagrams, this one and others, it's easy to see how the network's growing, how it's changed. And importantly, when we're thinking about this as a constructivist process, is there still work to do to make sure that students, community partners, and others are part of the team? And this is the type of information that can be used to fuel convergence, transdisciplinarity, and continued learning, because it's not a one and done. It's a constructivist process where we are continually learning.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I noticed that Lynn Nordstrom, our external evaluator, is on our call, and she is not just an external evaluator. We consider her a member of our team in the sense that, external evaluation is a key component of any really large interdisciplinary team such as this. And we really leverage that continual evaluation process that we undergo as a part of our network to continue to make adjustments and learn as we go as a part of our ongoing process. So that's a big piece of why the continued learning is listed as a key component of our approach. So
And Mindy, Mindy, if
Yeah.
I could just interrupt,
Please.
everyone could be a part of that. We'll be sending out a very, very, very short survey at the end of this to get your feedback. So
Thanks for that plug. Awesome.
yeah, I appreciate that beautiful segue. Thank you.
Great. All right. So this is actually running just about wonderfully on time. So because we want to shift this now to really a shared discussion. Because there is no one size fits all. And that's something we really emphasized in our paper, that this is really a work in progress for us as a network. This is in some ways our North Star. This is our aim. This is our intention for where we're at. And we are going to be reporting back and hopefully publishing more on this approach and as it rolls out and what we're up to and how things are actually happening. But we want to hear from you all, both members of the TN and also those of you who are doing convergent research or interdisciplinary research in other contexts, relating to how you see this reflected in your own work. What feedback, questions that you have for us related to this. I just unshared my screen because I want to see you all to be able to see each other, but I can reshare it if you need me to. But with the time that we have remaining, we'd like to end before the end of the hour so that you can go on to your next activities. But want to just move this into more of a conversation at this point, and hear from some of you. So I want to thank my co-presenters and also acknowledge that there are many other co-authors on this manuscript that are here today. If you click on the actual draft manuscript, you'll see that there are many other folks who contributed to the development of this paper, including Clarletta Chief, Jan Bol, and others that I see here today. So please click on that. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and let people start raising their hands to add to the discussion.
Hello, I'd like to join this discussion.
Please.
Yeah, I think when working with communities, we forget that there's a big disparity between Western science and the community themselves. And I think it should be a requirement that we are engaging with the communities prior to any proposals that are written. I think that's a given. Otherwise, we put ourselves in the side where communities will be distrustful of academia because they're trying to connect or try to work with communities without having a relationship with them. And that happens when there's money on the table. And so that automatically puts us in a very distrustful place when it comes to working with communities. I recently attended a conference called Centering Justice. And it was composed of people from the universities, the grassroots, community organizers, and different environmental justice centers. And this work has been there's been a long history in EJ for this type of work. And I think NSF is coming late to the table in this and trying to fit their framework to frameworks that have already been out there. So where does EJ fit in this? Where is EJ recognized in convergence research? I think it needs to be recognized. I know there's the DEIJ, but
I'm in a meeting.
but I think that's very different. And I think EJ needs to be explicitly stated or needs to be recognized as to where that fits in this framework, especially now with a lot of money coming down through the Biden administration. The communities are upset because academics are taking all the community's money, and they're not experts in working with communities, whereas the communities are, and that's their perspective. And academics are trying to teach and lecture on what community engagement is when they are not the experts. And a lot of times, we say it's community university partnerships, and it's sometimes just an individual that's working with the community. It's not the university. And with all the money coming with down the pipeline, like the EJ tax centers, most of those were given to universities, and universities are accused of getting that money when they don't even have relationships with communities. And I'm not saying this group or any group, I'm just telling you what was said at this meeting. And I quote somebody from that community meeting that said, we're pimping communities money for their pain. We're pimping money for their pain. Their pain is environmental injustice, and we're using federal dollars to get that money to do this type of work. So anyways, I'm just sharing some of the current thoughts out there that is being said. And this was hosted by the Tishman Environmental and Design Center, and talking about co-design. And it's located at the New School in New York City, and they have a history of working with communities in the sense like what is the community needs and what can help them take action. So I just wanted to chime in and share that what I learned last week when I attended that symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Carletta. Yeah, I definitely am hearing your comment about our need to do a better job of reflecting environmental justice in this framework. And I think also, I also heard from Carla, who's a member of our team, talking about tribal nations and community partnerships in the chat too. And I think that, what I see is that the places where we have our strongest community partners are places where we, especially with our tribal partners, is places where we already have existing relationships that have predated the TN. And I think that that's something that we've remarked upon in the paper, is that the NSF needs to find ways to create longer term funding commitments to communities, because you cannot create trust in 5-year increments. And so, I think that, we need to be able to, building these relationships. And as Carla made that comment, not coming and identifying, we're working with Sharon. I think Sharon's on this call. We're in a process right now of here in our in the New Mexico part of our system, working to on the element of meeting on identifying where the tribal questions are, some of those issues. These are ongoing relationships, but I think that it's a point really well taken. I appreciate your point. So thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in? How are we doing on time? Like 4 minutes left. Ways that people see this being reflected in their own research.
I think I could speak on, that. So I've been working with NACA on the Native American Community Academy, and I'm getting my master's in civil engineering, but I've also been working with architecture. Can you guys hear me good? Sorry. Okay. I've been working with Francisco, who's an architect, with my, research, which has been very helpful, and also to the Native American Community Academy on one of the projects that we're working in, building an outdoor learning cooking area. So I mean, I feel like this is applicable, with Convergence, and also with the transdisciplinary on many levels, and this is one instance where we're actually getting the input of the community first before, we go in and just start designing it the way that we want or the way that we think. We have to really take into account their culture and the way that they want this set up. So I think it's a really unique project, and one of the things that the TN is really, I think it's one of the greater examples.
Thank you, Daiquiri, and thank you for your work.
Mm-hmm.
Daiquiri's going to be going back to Washington, D.C. To represent the TN very soon as a part of the NSF Includes program, and she's going to be presenting on some of her work, including the work of with Yolanda Lynn on shared futures and the project that she's been doing in her Science Meets Arts project. So that's very exciting. Very exciting.
And that project as well is it's different from what I'm doing now, but it's also with the science and artists, the converging and transdisciplinary.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting work.
Anyone else? We've got one more minute before we have to close. And we got Lynn in the chat asking everyone to follow up. I want to put in one more plug for please attending some of our other talks this spring. We're going to be highlighting other efforts at Convergent Research that are going to be happening throughout the TN. And if you're interested in, oh, I forgot, I didn't share our slide, but we have, maybe I'll just do that last slide. I'll share my screen one more time. Let's see here. Let's see. Is this working? Please connect with us on the TN. We have a number of ways that you can reach out to us. We have a website, but we also are on various social media platforms. And in addition to that, we have listservs for community partners. So if you would like to be on that listserv and are not, please let us know. We'd be happy to add you so that you can stay connected with us. Really appreciate all of you joining us today and contributing to the discussion. And for those of you who are members of the network, thank you for all the work that you do. If you're a member of our advisory board, thank you for your service. If you're a member of one of our community partners, we so appreciate you. And if you just joined us to join in and lean in on the discussion, we really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to more discussion. Thank you so much. Take care.